Before we jump into today's topic, I just wanted to take a moment to kind of talk about it a little bit, what we're about to talk about. This is a really personal subject for me, and I know that we've talked about the mental health and addictiveness in games and MMOs already and stuff like that, but there's something very intimate and personal about sharing something like this in a more personal format. And I only realized that because I was really hesitant to make this episode, but it's something that I really want to talk about. And I really want to talk about how there's a huge chunk of my life now where I really hated story driven games, even though at one point those would have been some of the most important to me. And it's hard to talk about because this is a forever format in a sense, provided, all the backups don't get lost and, YouTube servers and et cetera, et cetera. Like everything would have to fail so perfectly for this to be just wiped out of existence. And when I share these things on stream, and I am a very open person with a lot of people even in my life, if you don't remember, then it's kind of lost. There's a lot of hours you'd have to dig through, even just for one stream, to find the exact thing I'm talking about. But when I do it in this format, it's edited. It's usually not too long, and it's just there. It just exists for a really long time until I decide to take it down, and then if someone else has a backup of it, well, it's still there. But this is a really important topic to me, and it's something that I really want to talk about because this has shaped my way of gaming, and I didn't even realize what was happening until everything kind of got sorted. So we're going to jump right into, I guess, why I hated RPGs for the past 10 years. Looking back at my personal history of gaming, there is one similarity between a lot of games. They have an excellent story. Halo, BioShock, Assassin's Creed 1 to 3, Final Fantasy 6 are just some of my favorite games I've ever played. But at some point over the last 10 years or so, I've actively avoided single-player games that are story-driven. I had no interest in branching out into new stories and missed a lot of launches of games that I've now played and absolutely love. Resident Evil Biohazard and Hellblade's Senua's Sacrifice are two immediate examples that come to mind. These are now some of my top games I've ever played, but I just wasn't paying attention to them because I became so focused on good gameplay that I forgot how much I also enjoyed a really good story. And I say that while also realizing how much I love the gameplay in Biohazard specifically. I struggled a little bit with some of the puzzles in Hellblade, but that's another story for another time. Throughout the past decade, I was focused more on the multiplayer experience, and although I actively engaged with the story in certain titles like World of Warcraft, I wasn't playing World of Warcraft for the story. I was playing it to connect with friends, family, and enjoy a cooperative experience. At times, for several expansions throughout my life, focusing on more battleground and player versus player content available to me. I didn't have a nice in-between where I'd play by myself. It was either a competitive experience or a cooperative social atmosphere. There wasn't really an in-between. You wouldn't have to travel far to find the next games that I would enjoy throughout my 20s. Fortnite, Heroes of the Storm, Magic the Gathering, Minecraft are all multiplayer-focused games that I mostly played for social aspects. I strived for excellence from a competitive standpoint, but it wasn't the only reason why I played the game. I wanted to find connections with other gamers. As I got older and settled into a new friend group, I ventured back into single-player games in the form of roguelikes. I had played some in the past, Enter the Gungeon, Nuclear Throne, Wizard of Legend, but it wasn't until I truly embraced the genre that I started venturing into things like Slay the Spire or Monster Train or eventually Hades. All of these games I've spent a long time playing now, but I will gladly admit my least favorite part about Hades is the story. I'm not saying it's a bad story, I'm just not in it for the story. And having to sit there and go through dialogue after dialogue just to do another run. It's just not what I'm about. But this transition from single-player games to multiplayer and back to more skill-based games was something I just thought everyone did as they got older. I have less time to play games, so I might as well enjoy what I'm playing. There's also the aspect of pick up and play that most roguelikes have that a busy schedule can accommodate. When you're working, 8 to 10 hours on commutes on top of that, it's much easier to just jump in for a little while and then back off. While that still holds true to a certain extent, I didn't realize that the reason why I was ignoring story-driven games, or games with larger time commitments, was a lack of support in my ongoing mental health struggles. Part 1. The diagnosis. For years, I had sought help in all the ways you were meant to. I went to therapy, but was quickly graduated and told long-term I do not require a therapist. I built support circles and asked my medical professionals for assistance in receiving more referrals and a clear diagnosis. Although having support systems helped, and my 6 months of therapy was ultimately a success and still benefits me to this day, it wasn't until 2 separate intake assessments with a mental health helpline that I sort of had a lead onto what was going on. My symptoms were all over the map for years, and it ranged to things like psychosis and visual and auditory hallucinations to just not feeling good, basically ever, and not really having a solution. And as many have experienced, the conversations I had wasn't entirely helpful at the time and upset me more than anything. I steered away from any sort of medication because it was a lot of, well, you could have. There was never confidence in the diagnosis I was receiving. You could have OCD, but you don't quite hit the criteria. Could have bipolar disorder, but you don't quite hit the mark. You could have schizophrenia or be on the schizophrenia spectrum, but you're not quite there yet. And despite the ADHD diagnosis that I received at the end of my second intake, not once was it suggested to me by a medical professional that we try treating that first and see if it helps alleviate a lot of the struggles I was having. It was all these "you're so close but" conversations that left me feeling like I had fallen through the cracks. Despite not feeling that anxious most of the time, I was told I had a generalized anxiety disorder. And I knew my depression was bad, but I was told by multiple medical professionals that I would always have a moderate or severe level of depression for the rest of my life. But then, on that second consult, when I was told I definitely had ADHD, things would change. Eventually. I sat with that diagnosis and did nothing. I was frustrated, annoyed, and fed up with a system that wanted to give me the runaround instead of helping me. Free healthcare is nice, but sitting and waiting for help when you've asked time and time again is when you start to feel neglected and like someone is trying to push you away from the answers you need. You're good enough. You manage your symptoms enough. You don't need our help. Someone else needs it more. It didn't help that after I had started seeking mental health help, so had several other close family members, and they all reached a diagnosis and received the support they needed much faster than I ever did. With a "you definitely have ADHD, but maybe more" diagnosis in hand, I went about my life for almost a year before I approached my medical team about trying medication. I wasn't convinced I needed it, but through the magic of YouTube Shorts, Instagram Reels, and TikTok, I ended up realizing that a lot of my symptoms were most likely from untreated ADHD. The nail in the coffin was when women started discussing how ADHD is often treated as bipolar disorder in women. Without warning, everything suddenly felt so much easier in life once I started on medication. I could concentrate on one thought, I could retrace my steps and remember where I put something down 30 seconds ago. I was able to focus more on creating because the distractions just didn't seem as loud. I went from being angry and reacting emotionally to small inconveniences to now having the patience of someone who has a neurotypical brain. I felt freed from something that no one had ever told me was such a large issue in my life. I'm able to sit down and play RPGs again. Everything just felt fine. The moderate to severe depression I had been diagnosed with for years turned out to be executive dysfunction. I'm able to sit down and take breaks from tasks and easily get up and continue working after a quick break. These concepts, which are likely so simple to many others, was groundbreaking for me, revolutionary. Content creation, but more specifically streaming, suddenly felt way easier. My ability to focus on what we were talking about and keep the train of thought on one track versus letting chat derail me was insane. It was night and day. It felt so easy that I asked my chat to pick one game for me to stream this year. A single game in the year of 2024. To give background on this, I realized within a few months of streaming that I actually hate streaming video games. I'm only there to talk, to chat, and bounce around new ideas, and that's kind of how this podcast came to be eventually. The game is kind of a filler when no one is talking, so I had a major shift in my content and moved to mostly just chatting streams. After a very chaotic bracket round to decide this game, I was left with one of the worst possible outcomes for me at the time. A story-driven game. Part 2, The Revelation. Chat had pulled a fast one out on me by getting me to play Resident Evil. I love horror games, and I like Resident Evil, so it honestly wasn't the worst outcome on that list. After a second bracket vote, it was settled that I would be playing Resident Evil Village. And then it was pointed out that Village is a direct sequel to Biohazard, so I would be playing Biohazard, then I would be playing Village. And so I purchased the game, installed, sat down, clicked go live, and for the first time in years, I really enjoyed a story-led game. In fact, I couldn't wait for the next stream every time I ended. I wanted to see what would happen next. I felt engaged, excited, and fully present until about 8 p.m. For those of you who are unaware, most medications for ADHD are only 12 hours long. People frequently take medication holidays and don't have to do every single day of the week if they don't want to. So around 8 p.m., routinely, is when my medication wears off. It suddenly went from an enjoyable experience to difficult to concentrate, getting distracted by side quests, and the inability to find doors or passageways that were literally right in front of me. The hardest part about staying on the medication is knowing that once it's been 12 hours, it's like all productivity goes out the window for me. Headaches return, the mental fog, and a general inability to continue doing whatever I was doing in an organized manner. It wasn't until after I was partway through Village I realized what the issue was. It wasn't me. It wasn't a departing love of RPGs throughout the years. It wasn't stories getting worse or gameplay being sacrificed in all of those incredible titles. Oh my gosh. It was my ADHD. For the doubters, and that would have been me for a long time, I keep my VODs up on Twitch and usually start streaming between 5 to 6 p.m. At about the 2 to 3 hour mark, you'll see when it starts to wear off, and I just look annoyed to be there. To everyone's surprise, but mostly my own, I offered to keep playing games. I always found it hard to stream gaming content as I get distracted too easily and mentally exhausted from work or can't keep a conversation going when trying to do something in a game. And everyone always liked when I paused the game and just talked at length about an issue that I was coming up against, so why not just chatting streams instead? Now, I feel like I can focus on the game while having conversations with chat and asking people how their day was or what they think about something. We still pause on occasion to talk about something, but we are able to roam the aisle of bug snacks and work together towards solving the mystery while talking about all those things. In fact, I asked them to pick between 4 relatively long games next, and they ended up choosing Like a Dragon Yakuza, which will take approximately 50 hours to beat. I don't beat my games very fast. This is probably going to be closer to 60 or 70. And I'm not worried about it feeling like a slog. I'm looking forward to playing a game that I've admired from a distance for so long, and I feel like, in this regard, starting it on a reboot is going to be kind of fun. Part 3, Regaining Lost Life. As someone who had such a late diagnosis in life, it's hard not to feel like you've been had. My life, relationships, and overall well-being would have been much more stable had I been given a correct diagnosis earlier in life. I probably wouldn't have wedged myself into needing fast, action-paced games, so much of it hadn't been for my inability to pay attention all these years. The excitement of roguelike runs with just enough repetition to make me feel like it was in a known space was so important for me. Playing a roguelike or a competitive shooter with fast rounds still scratches a certain itch, but it's no longer something I rely on to consider myself someone who plays games as an adult. I don't need those things to keep going. And it goes a lot deeper than I feel like I missed out on a lot of video games. But the diagnosis of ADHD makes me feel like I missed out on games I would have loved to play. And when you see how many games come out in a year, it feels almost impossible to go back and sift through everything to pick games that I think I would have really liked to play at one point. While there is more openness to long games, to more story-based games, there is an unfortunate feeling of hesitation a lot of the time. In some cases, straight up resistance. I said I wouldn't play Fallout maybe ever. I wouldn't touch that game as I don't like Bethesda games. And in 2024, after the TV show came out, I picked up my first Fallout game and fell in love. To be fair to me, Fallout New Vegas isn't developed by Bethesda, but it's still a Fallout game. It's kind of still made in the same vein, and I still really, really enjoy it. But the question will always remain, how do you regain lost life with a late-stage diagnosis? I'm not the only one going through this. There are a lot of people who fell through the cracks because of how strict the way that we diagnosed was. We didn't look at how it presents in different individuals, and we didn't think these things through. And a lot of people don't have a good mental health history because up until recently, we weren't that good about diagnosing people with it, and we weren't that good about getting people help. This is not an uncommon story. This is not something that is out of the blue and shocking. If you know me personally when the diagnosis happened, well, most people's reaction was like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Alana. Thanks for telling me. It's happening everywhere, and it feels like it's happening at a really rampant pace, and a pace that's really scary for a lot of people because so many people are speaking out about it. But like me, we're speaking out about it because maybe someone else will hear this and go, oh, that's kind of how I feel. And they'll start exploring. Do I have ADHD? Am I not neurotypical? Do I need help in other regards? And medication is not always a solution for everyone, and that's also okay. But for me, and for the amount of symptoms I have and how aggressive it gets, it's a lifesaver. I can live my life again. I've been given essentially a new life, and that's kind of incredible. But I've been fighting this bitter feeling of how do I regain my life now that I've started medication. I am so happy to finally feel like I can do what I want when I want, but it comes with a hard acknowledgement that I have lost time with friends, family, and the hobbies I love because I didn't have the help I needed. And I've come to the realization that there was not any other way for this to come about. How we diagnose ADHD has changed drastically from when I was a child. And no one in my family before me had an official diagnosis. In fact, others were diagnosed after my diagnosis. It is okay to mourn for what I have lost, but I am hoping to move past that and acknowledge that what I have experienced has shaped who I have become. I do not have to let go of the past to embrace the future, but fighting the past won't help me grow. I'm excited and ready to embrace playing RPGs again, to return to story-based games, which used to be so important to me. To remember what it felt like to just be at the end of a great story and be a little sad, because it's over. And I'll never get to experience it like the first playthrough ever again. And I just love that feeling so much. And I remember thinking as a kid, this is one of the best feelings in the world. And I still got it from movies, but I couldn't get it from games because they took too long. It was too much of my attention. If you stuck through this all the way, thank you very much. I know that this kind of didn't come across super nerdy or super gamery, but I really do think that this is such an important thing to talk about, and especially in the gaming space, this presents in such a different way. And it's funny, I used to play card games so much, and I played Magic the Gathering for quite a while at several different local game stores, and I had such a fun time doing it. I haven't gone back, and I haven't tried playing it since I've been on medication and since so much has changed, but I do wonder sometimes, what would it be like to go back and to return to so many of these games that I once knew in a specific way, and now I would almost be experiencing for the first time again. Not in the same way as you experience a story for the first time, but, you catch my drift. If you've listened all this way and you have a spare moment, hit me up with a story-based game you like that's released in the past 10ish years or so, because there's a huge chance I missed it, and there's a huge chance that I would really like to play it. So, as always, thank you for listening and thank you for your support. Until next time.